he will be talking about Olivier Messiaen Saint-François d'Assise, and I can't wait to listen to him.
Thank you very much. Articulated in 3 acts, lasting for almost 5 hours, Messiaen Saint-François d'Assise unfolds over 8 scenes, all of them conceived as true pictorial frescoes, which, in the same way as Giotto's frescoes on the life of the saint, portray some of the most important moments in the life of St. Francis. The succession of the scenes does not follow a specific timeline, neither historical nor fictitious. In each scene, Messiaen limits himself to a situation that culminates in a climax, facilitated by a miracle or an extraordinary event. As a result of all of Messiaen's works, Saint François d'Assise is perhaps the one that most explicitly unfolds the desire of Messiaen to appeal to the listener, and one aspect that he calls the marvelous, the merveilleux, a central concept in his work, in his aesthetic theological imaginary, which would let him to express the mysteries of untruths, so-called truths of the Christian faith, for what he's mostly aimed. The sources of the libretto of the opera are to be found in the complex bibliographical apparatus of Franciscan literature in the 13th and 14th centuries, the Fioretti, the considerations on the sacred stigmata, or even the Canticle of Brother Sun, but also in the early lives of St. Francis, written by Thomas of Celano and Saint Bonaventure, whose ideas on the life of the saint are here accompanied by all kinds of biblical, poetic, and theological quotations and paraphrases. These include implicit references to the theological aspects of Hans Urs von Balthasar and paraphrases of Aquina's Summa Theologica, a work much appreciated and commended by Messiaen himself. The result is a unique mosaic of quotations and paraphrases that sketches Messiaen's aesthetic work. In order to understand better the narrative program of the opera, I will proceed to analyze the different events that take place in the play. In the first 3 scenes of the first act, Messiaen confronts us to the great initial step of Francis the man following his conversion. The plot line of the first scene, entitled La Croix, the Cross, is built on the chapter 8 of the Fioretti. In it, Francis illustrates to brother Leo the nature of the called perfect joy, la joie parfaite, consisting, according to the saying, in the affliction of Christ on the cross. The second scene, the Louds, present a fragment of everyday life in the convent, with the singing of the liturgy of the hours. Messiaen draws here on the poetic work the same, including numerous quotations of his Canticle of Brother Sun, as well as all kinds of biblical quotations. Finally, the third scene, Le Baiser au Lépreux, the kiss of the leper, closes the first act, in which Messiaen revisits the cliché of Franciscan literature represented by lepers. In this case, the leper's symbol of penitence and Francis' compassion culminate in the leper's miraculous cure, recounted in chapter 25 of the Fioretti. Francis is definitely freed from fear and reaches the first state of the holiness that is to characterize him from then on. The second act, made up of 3 more scenes, merely confirms some of the narrative lines expressed in the first. The fourth scene, L'Ange Voyageur, the traveling angel, opens with the same lines as the first, in which brother Leo reiterates his fear of death. The angel's visit to the convent corresponds here to the chapter 4 of the Fioretti. The fifth scene, L'Ange Musicien, the angel musician, is based on the second chapter of the considerations on the sacred stigmata. Provided with a viola, the angel plays music that transforms St. Francis to the point of bringing him to a state of contemplative ecstasy close to death. This is one of the central moments of the work. God finally speaks to Francis through music, the music of the invisible force. It is this music, its blinding beauty, that allows Francis to acquire a definitive understanding of the perfect joy, thus receiving a first manifestation of the ecstasy prior to the great and definitive step towards grace that the stigmata will bring on him. Eventually, the second act closes with the sixth scene, La Prêche aux oiseaux, the sermon to the birds, famous chapter on St. Francis giving a sermon to birds and birds listening to him and responding. It is one of the longest and most exceptional scenes of the work, in which the story of chapter 16 of the Curate is used by Messiaen to express what is undoubtedly his best music in the bird-like melodic style. Actually, the seventh section of this scene invites us to an extraordinary concert of birds, which can be seen as the result of countless hours of ornithological journeys taken by Messiaen and of tireless, rigorous, and extremely demanding as well work in the service of music. Consisting of the last two scenes, the third act is the culmination of Francis's spiritual journey. The seventh scene, the stigmata, corresponds to the third chapter of the considerations on the sacred stigmata. The experience of the suffering of the cross, which the impression of the stigmata makes on Francis, constitute the prelude to the glory of paradise, to which he is destined. The imitation of the Christological model embodied in the Franciscan way points to the definitive figure of the alter Christus as defined by Christian historiography, which is how it's called St. Francis. Eventually, Messiaen confronts us with the eighth scene, La Mort et la Nouvelle Vie, death and new life, in which the saints' farewell, death, and future resurrection sung by the choir are expressed through all kinds of poetic images and biblical quotations. Both the riches of the orchestration and the unusual sonic dimensions of the musical discourse are nothing else but a reflection of the inner richness of Francis, a man extremely poor from a material point of view, but rich in the sound, the flowers, the trees, the birds, the oceans, and the mountains, as the Canticle to Brother Son expressed. As a matter of fact, Messiaen designed the narrative structure of the work in such a way that in each of the scenes, Francis would reach a higher stage on his way to sainthood. Spiritual progress, a kind of continuous ascent that governs his way to sainthood, is one of the central aspects of the work. It's also manifested on the musical side, which comes to function as an amplification of the libretto. In such a particular context, it would not be strange that within the thematic sphere, the themes and motives associated with St. Francis would reflect the change in his spiritual stage through multiple transformations in its morphology, rhythmically, melodically, and even harmonically. However, these are not extreme transformations, since the themes are to a certain extent recognizable to the listener at all times. Nevertheless, they still show the mobility that distinguishes them in contrast to the rest of the themes, which are more like fixed themes and more static themes, all of them related to the corresponding characters of the work, as well as to the six great narratives, themes that characterize and govern the work, which are the theme of nature, the theme of truth, death, love, grace, and perfect joy. There are motives which are also present in all of Messiaen works, so we should say, deserve special mention too, as does the musical association that Messiaen establishes between each bird and each bird motive, in this case, and the character it accompanies in the work. In such a context, the possibility of considering the presence of two leitmotifs, especially in the case of the moving themes, should not be completely ruled out. However, a first approach will reveal that Messiaen works in a different way than Wagner did. Wagner's musical discourse contributed to a large extent to nourish and reinforce the dramatic substratum and the association of character with their destiny in a clear and, to some extent, identifiable way. Wagner's thematic map was no more than the product of these gradual modifications that ultimately contributed to the enrichment of the dramatic action. Such a process, generally additive or subtractive, allowed the setting up of a musical engine, with, besides describing musical in different situations the character faced, it was a perfect and complete narrative element, a kind of guide of the stage action. On the contrary, in Messiaen's case, the articulation of these leitmotif respond to a completely different architectural and aesthetic criteria. Wagner starts from Beethoven's formal model, a proposal that he accepts, expands, and leads to the limits of his harmonic and formal possibilities. Messiaen's model, on the contrary, is to be found on the works of Paul Dukas and Claude Debussy in this way, where the oxytonic accentuation of the French language, as well as the intonation and genuine inflections of the diction, prevail over any other given structure. In addition to that, the articulation of the themes in St. Francis is not overly elaborate in its development. Both the formal articulation and the thematic elaboration in this case respond rather to a principle of construction of an essentially additive nature, something quite common in Messiaen's conception of form, and really here also present. Thus, the absence of Francis in the fourth scene implies the absence of his theme, which in Wagner's case is not clever. Of all of the themes we hear throughout the work, the one I have referred to as the theme of St. Francis draws our attention from the very beginning of the work. It stands for the presence of the same from his first appearance. Here we have it, and we are going to listen and extract. As a faithful reflection of his character, the theme also functions as a great melodic generator. On the one hand, Messiaen modifies its initial monophonic formula through different harmonization, transposition, augmentations, diminutions, and rhythmic fragmentations. On the other hand, some of the intervals that characterize it in its melodic aspect are the germ of the melodic design of other themes. The most outstanding melodic feature of the theme is provided by the tritone interval, also known in the Middle Age by satanic presence with the so-called human music. The historical retrospective of this interval, therefore, leads us to conclude that Messiaen not only deliberately opposes the symbolic heritage of the interval in harmonic terms, but also associates it with the Trinity, and with the Christian perfection of the number 3, and with all the religious symbolic resonance that the number implies. Hence, we are here faced with an actual transmutation of science, a poetic idea that we must attribute rather to the natural privilege of the presence of the augmented fourth interval in the melodic aspect of the opera, which Messiaen comes to make it a true profession de foi, professional faith. The theme of St. Francis thus sounds from the first appearance of the protagonist in the first scene, and its head begins with a descending augmented fourth that draws a double tritone, C sharp, G, C sharp, formed by a total of 12 notes distributed over 4 bars. The 2 central ones constitute a perfect palindrome with F sharp as a center. This note stands in turn for the axis of 2 more successive augmented fourths, the second double tritone, C, F sharp, C. This kind of geometrical figure would once again symbolize the divine idea of perfection, situated by Messiaen in eternity beyond time and space. I quote, to speak of an immutable presence and indivisible presence is to mention eternity, and this mention implies affirming the existence of God, end of quote. Such is Messiaen tells us in the first volume of his Traité de Rythme, quoting on his own side St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica. Moreover, the smallest interval we can observe in the theme of St. Francis is the major third, once more the number 3. Therefore, Messiaen unfolds a melody by axial symmetry, so that the second motive of the theme corresponds to an almost exact melodic and rhythmic retrogradation of the first, with the exception of the starting C sharp. We can consider then the division of the theme into two motives around the E sharp, each composed of a total of 5 different notes: G, C sharp, G sharp, E, and C. This melodic material comes from the 6th mode of limited transpositions, here in its 3rd transposition. Once again, number 3 for perfection, eternity, etc. On the other hand, the theme ends with in the same way as it begins, with the repetition of the descending augmenting 4th, C sharp, G. As Francis the man progresses in his spiritual journey, the theme will begin to show signs of considerable morphological development. For instance, the second appearance of the theme takes place again in the second section of the first scene. Messiaen then juxtaposes it with an additional period. Here we have it, orchestrated in unison on the strings section. The new period functions as a kind of apodosis, a kind of consequent to the theme. Its first note, C sharp, also completed the perfect symmetry of the first period, while allowing the formation of a final double triton in the melodic design. We can hear it. From this moment on, in the successive sections of the first scene, Messiaen presents the theme in a vocal version sung by Francis. First, the motifs appear separately up to 3 times, and finally Francis sings the theme in its entirety, repeating the first motif and amplifying the second. Then Messiaen adds a unique orchestral coloring, change of timbre, violin, cello, martinet waves, and bells. Once again, Francis is singing here a quotation from the letter of St. Paul to the Galatians, which seems to summarize the narrative content of the scene. We are thus witnessing the first rhythmic augmentation of the theme. The quavers are now crotchets, and the crotchet becomes a minim. The tempo is also considerably slower and the character moderate. Messiaen introduces here the initial motif of the theme, which is repeated 2 times, and he also insists on its initial note, G, repeated 3 times. Despite this first modification, the first really important transformation of St. Francis' theme does not take place until the 3rd scene, le baiser or le feu. The appearance of the angel and the hearing of the angel's theme act as a kind of catalyst for the protagonist's spiritual state. When we witness the first major transformation of the theme, its melodic, harmonic, and color aspects, Messiaen is reinforcing in the musical apparatus the change that is taking place through a double miracle on the dramatic level. On the one hand, Francis' kiss to the leper brings about his miraculous healing, and on the other hand, Francis becomes Saint Francis, first time, overcoming his fear to the lepers and taking a further step on his way to sainthood. In this context, the transformation of the theme of the melodic side involves its transposition. We now hear it transposed to the upper minor third, which melodically with melodic material corresponding to the sixth transposition of mode 6, 2 times 3, starting from an E and with an A natural on the axis. You can hear it in its homophonic way. Three more transpositions of the theme will follow in the fifth section of the third scene, all preceding Francis' kiss to the leper. The third transposition comes close to the end and is astonishing in that it once again presents the original version of the theme, but now orchestrated with a full wind section and with a harmonization that ranges from 5 to 9 voices, to the point of disfiguring the harmonic color with which we have associated the theme up to now. This is not a redundant transformation. We find ourselves here on the threshold of Francis' sainthood. The harmonization, you can see here just the first 7 chords. I have called the first one the Francis chord. It has a wide sonority and Messiaen always reserves it for the initial note of the motive. Its origin is to be found in a pentachord, chromatic pentachord, we call it, whose initial note Messiaen plays in the upper voice, the C sharp, and doubles it with 2 more octaves. The last chord, called number 7, is even more singular, not only because of its harmonic saturation close to the cluster, but also due to the fact that Messiaen used it exclusively in the harmonization of the note that constitutes the axis of symmetry of the theme. I have called it the Code of Sanctity, as it appears in the moments before Francis kissed the leper, and is a kind of chord rather simple that looks very complicated. It contains all of the notes of the third transposition of the mode 3, reminding us as what Messiaen called the chord of resonance chord. In this way, Francis' spiritual transformation is definitely transferred from the musical to the dramatic apparatus. And to sum up, in conclusion, an analysis of the multiple characters themes of characters in Saint Francois d'Assise also confirms the association between the narrative, internal and external programs. Just as Saint Francis experiences a continuous ascent on his way to grace and perfect joy, the thematic apparatus that depicts him musically also suggests this same inner journey with the different transformations of each of the themes, always according to the dramatic situation. We can indeed argue that Messiaen articulates the psychological and physical meanings of the protagonist through a melodic, harmonic, rhythmic, and timbral framework. This framework can be defined in part thanks to the profound thematic unity, which not only reflects the meanings but also amplifies them, making it possible to establish a clear correlation between the textual and musical features of the work. Thank you very much.
We have time for 2 questions, if a question takes a minute. Also 2 minutes of questions. No?
I'm just wondering about this triton interval because we
I
are
wanted to ask.
considered like a diabolus musica, and here is the symbol of Saint Francis. Do you think about why Messiaen is right opposite of this concepts of rhetorics, traditional rhetorics?
Yes. First of all, because in his book, Technique de mon langage musical, he tells us that he can hear an extra over the resonance of this C. And he tells us that the normal resolution for him of this F sharp is the C. So for him, it's a completely different approach to the triton.
So he thinks acoustically, not symbolically, yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same
But also
time,
symbolic.
number
Yes.
3 is also
But also,
present.
yes. Yeah.
And number 3 related to Christian
Yes.
historiography is Trinity. And Trinity is perfection and eternity is
something reasonable. And functioning within a text, I think, is the key phrase there. There's a term, isotopy, that a text, so I talked about infinite semiosis first. That goes on forever. That's the interpreter.
Bravo, Ugo, bravo. Also, shall we go on?
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions, and that's really interesting. Thanks a lot, Vicente. I hope we will find a way to, but now we really have to go on. So let me introduce Professor Smolkin Kirill.
Yeah, yeah.
Kirill Smolkin from Moscow. Also, musicologist and performer. Hello, Professor.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Wonderful. So he's also a choral conductor, and he continues studying. He has won prizes as a talented youth, Treasure of Russia. Wow. So he's talking about Kindertotenlieder by Mahler, and I am really curious about your paper. So thanks a lot and welcome.
Thank you very much. I just have to correct you a little bit. I'm not a professor, not yet. I've just graduated from the Moscow Conservatory, so I'm a master in music, but not a professor yet.
Okay.
Hello everybody. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Yeah, let me share my screen. Just a moment. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. First of all, I have to say that it's an honor and great pleasure to take part in this Congress, though I couldn't come to Barcelona in person, to my great regret. Today, I'm going to speak on a topic that appears in scientific space maybe not too often, namely expression marks as a specific lingual phenomenon in music. And I will try to reveal their features in the example of Gustav Mahler's Kindertotenlieder on poems by Friedrich Rückert, perhaps one of, if not the most tragic vocal cycle. Tempo and expression marks do not seem to be the most popular area for researchers. As defined by David Fellows, they may be the most consistently ignored components of a musical score. Unfortunately, few publications would be entirely devoted to the issue of expression marks, apart from the articles on specific questions and more often on tempo marks. I know only two large works on this topic, and would really appreciate it if you could suggest some others. One of such publication is the book written in Russian by Natalia Korykhalova, who focuses on the most commonly used and mainly verbal marks in Italian language. Another work is the thesis by Peter Tenhef, written in German and dedicated to the studies of tempo and expression marks in the music of the 19th century. In one of the chapters, Tantrev considers expression marks of Gustav Mahler's symphonies in historical aspect. There is also one article about tempo marks in Mahler's vocal work, namely the article by Hermann de Neuser in German on tempo relations in the first of Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen. It's actually inspired me to study this topic further. However, today I will be speaking about the expression rather than tempo marks. By the end of the 19th century, expression marks have achieved an unprecedented variety. In Mahler's music, they became not just composers or arrangers' additions to the musical text, as they are defined in Riemann lexicon, but an essential part of this text. Mahler's scores are literally overflowing with various, sometimes very expressive performance instructions. Without all these ausdrucksvoll and ausdruckslos, klagend, schmerzlich, warm, weich, zart, etc., not to mention countless Italian words, it is difficult to imagine the music of Mahler and its graphical shape. In vocal music, composers' marks get perhaps exceptional diversity because they inevitably correspond to the sense of the poetic word. In songs and choral symphonies, the very appearance of colorful marks often was inspired by the expression of the human voice. As we know, Mahler paid great attention to the word in his works and considered it as a vehicle for his musical idea, as he wrote to Arthur Seidl. Perhaps such a word, such a redeeming word, another Mahler's expression from the same letter, was for him not only the poetry, but also the marks that he left in his scores, just like a playwright who writes stage directions in a play. I would also point out that expression, as well as tempo marks, were for Mahler compositional elements. Along with melody, harmony, rhythm, and instrumentation, they reveal the composer's principles. And one of such principles was the law of eternal evolution, eternal development, which Mahler particularly aimed at his songs. He never repeated the same music material in theme recapitulations or in new strophes. For example, in each strophe of the first song of Kindertotenlieder, Nun will die Sonne so hell aufgehen, now the sun will rise as brightly, Mahler changes pitch, melodic pattern, orchestration, as well as expression and dynamic marks. As you can see, compared to the first song, in the second, to the first strophe, in the second strophe, there are signs of diminuendo from piano to pianissimo, and the mark ausdruckslos inexpressively in parts of oboe and horn. Also, to bassoon's lamento motifs, an Italian mark espressivo is added. And Mahler makes such small but significant changes all the time. Many marks in this cycle reflect its deep tragic content. This is, for example, schwermütig at the beginning of the first song, which means gloomy, moody, sad, etc. Considering synonyms when translating expression marks could help the deeper understanding. For example, the mark klagend, which appears for the first time in this song too, in the oboe part, and then can be found in other songs. In the tragic context of the cycle, could be translated not just as complaining, but rather as mourning or lamenting the loss of a child. The word dumpf at the beginning of the third song, Wenn dein Mütterlein, when your mother, can be translated as muffled in relation to sound of, or to voice, dau in relation to a feeling of fear or pain, weg in relation to a memory, musty in relation to the air or smell. All this translation to one degree or another can be attributed to the character of the musical sounds, especially in view of the orchestration, English horn, bassoon, cellos playing pizzicato, and of course, the sorrowful nature of this song. The tragic sense of the cycle is also expressed by marks related to the feeling of pain, such as mit ausbrechendem Schmerz, with thirst and pain, which appears in the vocal part of the third song. This is an incredible moment of an open expression of feelings, and it's related to the only in the whole cycle direct addressing the child. We could possibly think that Mahler used too many expression marks. Nevertheless, their appearance is always justified. Using them, the composer pursued a specific goal to warn a performer against misinterpretations of his intentions, or to intensify the character of the music, or to give it new emotional content. And if the character is easily understood, it's enough for him to use only dynamic or phrasing signs. For example, at the beginning of the second song, Nun seh ich wohl warum so dunkle Flammen, now I see well why with such dark flames, that is marked as ruhig, nicht schleppend, calm, not dragging, appear chords which can hardly be described as calm. And Mahler uses here only marks of accent and sforzando. These chords do not need any verbal explanation. Their character and emotional content are obvious. It is a sob that breaks through for a moment and calms down again. There are two special marks in this cycle, and of course in other Mahler scores, namely ausdruckslos, inexpressively, and ohne Ausdruck, without expression. They represent the opposite pole of sharpened expression. I would call it anti-expressiveness. As Theodor Adorno wrote about the music of the 20th century, even expressionlessness becomes an expression. But what did Mahler mean by demanding musicians to perform his music inexpressively? The simple answer is that he tried to avoid an unnecessary expressiveness that borders on sentimentality or even vulgarity. However, in this case, he had a mark ohne Sentimentalität, without sentimentality, which he had used in the fourth song of his cycle, Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen. I rather think that by marks ausdruckslos and ohne Ausdruck, Mahler tried to achieve a special sound quality, which involves a kind of non-relief intonation, muted timbre shades, and new, unusual colors. The first use of the mark ausdruckslos we've already seen in the first song in oboe and horn parts. There, it replaces the mark klagend and is perceived as a change of emotional condition, like exhaustion that comes after a nervous ecstasy. By mark ohne Ausdruck, in the third song, Mahler achieves the dull monotony of the sound of a repetitive motif. It's also significant that soon it's replaced by the opposite Italian mark, molto espressivo. But even more interesting is a paradoxical combination, the simultaneous use of two contradicting marks. Again, in the first song, Mahler divides parts of cellos and in the high register and violas into different emotional poles. As you can see, both of them have a similar melodic and rhythm pattern, but violas are expected to play extremely expressively and cellos without expression at all. Thus, not only the finest diversity of texture is achieved, but also a kind of emotional polyphony. Another group of marks in this cycle is associated with quiet and restrained emotions. Mit verhaltener Stimme, with a restrained, as if strangled, voice sings a soloist at the beginning of the cycle. Innig, with deep, genuine feelings, sincerely. In the third song, he or she addresses the child that lost forever. Leise, soft and quietly, almost under the breath, sings in the finale, representing a parent who remained alone with his grief. This is how Mahler achieves that emotional concentration when it is the quiet voice that becomes almost the most audible, the most expressive in the whole cycle. To the quiet expressiveness belong light moments of hope and peace, contrasted to the general atmosphere of grief. The fourth song is the most illustrative in this sense. It differs from others in major keys and particular warmth and gentleness. In refrains, der Tag ist schön, the day is fair, along with major keys, soft timbres of woodwinds and violins playing concertino, Mahler writes in the vocal part the characteristic marks zart, tenderly or gently, and warm, warmly. This light line finds its conclusion in the finale, the major coda of the fifth song, in diesem Wetter, in this weather. At its final section, Mahler marks as langsam wie ein Wiegenlied, slowly like a lullaby. And the singer's part, he marks leise bis zum Schluss, quietly until the end. Not a single shade of feeling or emotional change shouldn't appear in the soloist's voice anymore. However, it would be a simplification to understand this conclusion only in sense of calming and consolation through the acceptance of peace of innocent children in eternal world. Although this semantic side shouldn't be missed, of course. But I would suggest that in this tragic cycle, all means are aimed at expressing the grief of parents, and a bright key of D major and dynamics with orchestration, pianissimo, rare use of bass instruments, predominance of wind timbres, and the mark weich, soft, in parts of horn and bassoons, and the genre prototype of this kind of song within a song, i.e. lullaby. So everything has an inversion semantic orientation in the tragic direction. Gustav Mahler extended a significant verbal layer through diverse expression marks. Remaining beyond the sound process, they, however, affected during the performance interpretation. Thus, non-musical elements become components of the musical language, part of a musical composition forming the basis of its appearance and essence. The word has an artistic effect of no less significance than changes in melody, harmony, orchestration, etc. But if rhythm and harmony are musical means, then expression marks should be considered as linguistic means. They indicate the performance manner, emphasize musical emotions, and help to reveal the composer's intentions. Is there still freedom of interpretation with such a variety of performance instructions? Looking at Mahler's numerous marks regulating almost every note, I remember Stravinsky's words that his music is to be read, to be executed, but not to be interpreted. But even a formal execution of all the prescriptions in the score is not an easy task, and how much is unwritten behind the notes. However, an extraordinary performance comes from an informal and personal reading of a composer's marks, especially emotional ones, whose range of perception is endless. That's why are so different the interpretations of the same Mahler's text by the great musicians. They certainly did not ignore Mahler's expression marks, but each artist felt and understood them in different ways, bringing part of their individuality to this music. In conclusion, these are some aspects that I haven't covered in today's presentation, yet you would probably find interesting. I will just mention them. This is an issue of bilingual marks, German and Italian, translating them into different languages in terms of publishing or performing, an issue of perception of the expression marks in Mahler's scores, and the specific function of Italian mark Morendo, and some others. Of course, this is not a complete list. At this point, I end my presentation and thank you for your attention. If you have any questions or comments, I will be happy to receive your feedback. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much, Magister Smolkin. It was a pleasure. Before there's time for questions here, but there's a first thing that I would like to say. Congratulations to this paper that matches very much Mahler's personality, in that Mahler appears as maybe a last complete musician, where the performing and the composing are still part of one only activity. And you are clearly aware of that, the way you treat the material and you integrate the text and music and all these aspects. So congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
Of course, what comes after that is this that you were mentioning in the Grove's dictionary, I think it was, where in the 20th century, you have mid 20th century, this terrible tendency to abstraction, where music becomes something of a skeleton, and then things like dynamics or expressive marks become something accessory, secondary. But of course, Mahler's idea and your idea clearly as well is that these are part of the music. And if music is considered a sound manifestation and not only an abstraction. So I wanted to highlight this because I was very, very pleased to find that. And now, colleagues, want to ask something, comment? Hi, Peter. We were talking about Kindertotenlieder. Oh, colleague from Moscow. Can you imagine? Young man.
Maybe I could make a short comment about the music of the 20th century in this sense. Maybe you're partly right about the expression marks that they have become really not too important. Yeah, but at the same time, the word in a musical composition becomes more and more significant in some musical compositions, of course. I'm speaking about, for example, very famous example, the second part of Alban Berg concerto, violin concerto, yeah, where he quotes the jazz box chorale as well as the text, yeah, as is genug. And then another example is Luigi Nono's quartet, full of quotations from the Hölderlin, from the Friedrich Hölderlin. And maybe more extravagant example is the so-called intuitive music, yeah, where the traditional score is replaced by graphical and as well as text instructions. So yeah, maybe it's not the expression marks, yeah, but it's the word which becomes as significant as the sound.
Yes, thanks a lot for this comment. Absolutely.
So thank you very much. It was great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I may introduce my dear colleague and friend, Sanja Kish, from Zagreb University, who is presenting a word, Croatian glagolitic requiem of 1996 by a composer Igor Kuljeric. Hi. And the work is an opportunity to go into cultural, political, historical aspects of the new Croatia, and surely also many other aspects, religious, liturgical, textual. I mean, glagolitic already, you know. So, welcome, Sanja.
Thank you for this warm welcome words. I just wanted to congratulate both previous speakers. I don't know, they already left.
Yeah, Vicente left for a minute. I guess.
But it's not 5 o'clock yet.
No, and Kirill is probably online.
Yeah, are you there? No worries.
Yeah, he went. Yes.
Kirill, hi.
Yeah.
You probably cannot see me.
Yeah, I can see you. Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to congratulate on your paper, and maybe if you did not read it yet, I will recommend you the book by Julian Johnson called Mahler's Voices, which discusses a lot about his expression marks in symphonies and songs.
Thank you.
Johnson.
Could you repeat could you repeat the name?
I just put it in the chat.
Oh, it would be perfect.
If I find the chat box. Where is the chat box?
Maybe on mass on the right. No.
No.
You will know.
I don't have participants. No.
I can see. I can find it either.
Or maybe there's no. There is maybe no chat box. Oh, maybe we can. No. What is this? There was a chat box in the last. Never mind. I can send you an email later on.
Oh, it would be perfect. I would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Or did you show it? There is nothing. Huh?
Yeah.
No.
Sì, stavamo buscando il chat che dentro non l'avevamo trovato.
And now where to hide this participants like this? Okay.
You can see your arm clearly. Your strong arm.
Okay. Is this?
See? No, it's not good.
Yeah, but I can find this. Maybe we close it.
Oh.
this Zoom screen moves. Okay, so I'm a bit short-sighted. It's complicated. Okay. Okay. Good. We still have 1 minute. With all trouble. We begin. Okay, I'll begin. It's 17:00, it says here. So thank you everybody for attending. Today I'll talk about creation music. I don't know how many of you are aware of creation music, and I hope that I'll be able to introduce new listeners to our musical heritage. So as Joan already mentioned, that the final decades of the 20th century present one of the most tumultuous periods in creation history, and the new political status painstakingly gained during the creation war of independence raised questions about the essence of our worldly existence, which was also one of Mahler's favorite topics, emphasizing the persistent necessity of repositioning in terms of national, religious, and individual human identity. And where science failed to provide any satisfying answers, the arts responded in the most striking fashion. So Igor Kudryav's creation Glagolitic Requiem from 1996 for soloists, mixed choir, and the symphony orchestra certainly counts among such powerful responses and represents the pinnacle of this genre in the history of creation music so far, in my opinion. Today we'll focus on the first movement, Pokoj Vični, that's Requiem Aeternam, and Gospodi Pomiluj, which is Kyrie eleison. To give an introduction to the sources of the composer's inspiration, as well as the central worldview questions that arise from the score. Although they may seem universal, those topics are in a way novel in the context of the creation art music, since the compositional output on our current territory was considerably modest when these topics and their meanings appeared on the stage in the history of music, and were actually discovered only in the age of postmodernism somehow, because our church music in the first place was somehow otherwise constructed and relied heavily on folklore and Sicilian tradition, which did not pay much attention to topical heritage of Western music. So, for those not acquainted with the composer, please allow me to make a short biographical introduction. So, Kudryavich was one of the most important creation composers altogether, and he graduated in composition from the Zagreb Academy of Music. Later, he studied opera repertoire at La Scala in Milan and experimental music in the Studio di Fonologia Musicale at RAI. And later on conducting with Igor Markevich in Monte Carlo. And as a conductor, he appeared regularly with all major creation ensembles and was also the chief conductor of many of them and so on. So after the first experimental phase in the early 80s, he changed his orientation towards exploring his traditional identity. Although he never abandoned the positive experiences he had with a musical avant-garde in Milan. And this special part of his opus refers to his creation roots with influences from the glagolitic religious practice and other historical artistic practices. This mature work, the creation of Glagolitic Requiem, belongs also to this category. He is the author of 3 operas and 1 unfinished opera, and also wrote extensively for theater, movies, crossover projects, all sorts of genres and occasions. And also, he was a particularly prolific arranger for all sorts of settings. So a very skilled practical musician. The motivation for Kudryav's composition of Requiem came from different sources. And first of all, its composition followed directly after the Croatian War of Independence, which ended in 1995, so 1 year before the work was composed, and was meant, among other purposes, as an homage to the victims of the war. Furthermore, with this work, Coolidge positioned himself in several cultural contexts, such as Croatian, Catholic, humanist, and himself as a heir of the great tradition of Western European art music, which can be clearly read from the numerous referential points of this scope. Finally, it was an expression of Coolidge's firm belief in salvation through music, following St. Augustine's thought, the one who sings praise twice. And Coolidge actually himself considered himself a great sinner, so he did a lot of salvation efforts for himself. However, being extremely unsatisfied with contemporary church music in Croatia, as you can read in this slide, Coolidge decided to contribute in his own way by composing a masterpiece that proves that liturgical music today can offer far more than what's often heard in our churches. The very title of the piece begins with the adjective Croatian, suggesting the difference between the composer's own local and any other glagolitic traditions. Although the composers claim that the title of the piece refers to the intentional blending of the glagolitic melisma from the entire Croatian Mediterranean Sea circle, his main inspiration was drawn from his childhood memories from the Adriatic, from a very small place on the island of Silva, near Zadar and Zadar Lagos, where glagolitic singing as an oral tradition still existed vividly until a couple of decades ago. So, Croatians were one of the Slavic peoples converted to Christianity who received the privilege to serve the offices and masses in their native tongue, a particular variant of Old Slavonic, and they follow the Roman Rite. So the text of Coolidge's Requiem relies also heavily on the oldest glagolitical Misale printed on the territory of today's Croatia in Sen in 1483, which is the fourth oldest Croatian glagolitical incunabulum altogether. The Misale contains several funeral masses for different occasions, and those texts were compiled for the purpose of this scope. All these masses follow the same disposition containing of the traditional Requiem parts in Roman. So glagolitic chant today can be heard only in one place, Vrbenik, a little town on the island of Krk, where this tradition is still very alive. And this is the only recording available from the movie Glagolica by director Vincent Moon from 10 years ago, 2012. So you'll hear a specific heterophony, which is characteristic and a characteristic local variant of Phrygian mode, which will be very important for the Requiem itself. Is anything there? No. There is not in
charge.
Let it charge completely. Okay.
I'm not sure, but if you try again.
I'll try again. I'm sorry. It won't work anyway. Let's try to find it on YouTube if you can. If it would be possible, just to have an impression of a couple of seconds. Oh no. Oh. I don't really think that this will be okay. Okay, let's try just a bit. So you've noted this cadence and everything. So The glagolitic chant of Kudry's childhood was no more than a starting point of his creation. He chose to avoid overt paraphrasing of this orally transmitted musical material and resisted the temptation of consulting ethnomusicological sources, and rather having in mind Bartok's words, completely absorbed the idiom of peasant music, which has become his musical mother tongue. Kudryć created the spirit of glagolitic chant by employing the expressive potential of medieval modes in their local folk variants, especially the traditionally death-related Phrygian mode, within the somewhat distorted functional web of the extended harmonic tonality. Unlike the Gregorian Requiem chant, which is in the sixth mode with a major third above the finalis, as well as the traditional Pokoevichny glagolitic chant, Kudryć draws upon the traditional treatment of mode in Western art music, and he chose B-flat minor as his main tonality. And the work progresses through tonalities to end with a symmetrical content in E-flat minor with a piccolo third at the end. Well, this E-flat major, which in accord with Schubert represents the love, devotion, and intimate confidential conversation with God. So let's hear a bit of music. So apart from this end, only two places in the whole opus, which is about 1 hour long, are in major mode, and this is this corresponds with the Roman text said Signifer Sanctus Michael, and the Sanctus and Hosanna. All other parts are in minor mode or Phrygian mode, as you heard. So this Phrygian mode and Phrygian inflection is very, very important. And now I'll show you a short example where it emphasizes the most striking part of the text, which always bear meanings of fear, horror, death, sorrow, pain, and threat, and so on. So this part corresponds with the Latin text Liberaris Deore Leonis. Leonis says first wild frame and necadent obscurum, marked by Phrygian inflection. So beside the Phrygian inflection, which is I suppose known to all of you, there are direct references to traditional Eastern two-part singing in narrow, non-tempered intervals, which has been described in the UNESCO's representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. This way of singing, of course, is stylized here in this work. So the topical content of the piece reveals numerous references to historical bearers of musical meanings, and besides the modal pathos, the beginning of the piece, where the choir prays for the eternal rest, relies upon strong Baroque idioms, the Sarabande Grave, as in the Baroque lament in combination with the quasi-ostinato bass. And this bass line begins as a chromatic lamento but never finishes. It is repeatedly interrupted until the very end of the composition, until the last movement, and he always avoids this ending before the very end, where we have a fully fledged chromatic E-flat minor scale until the E-flat scale to the whole octave until the cadence. So instead, this fa and there is no me, it is always a point of stagnation on some interruption or waiting for some harmonic digression. So let's hear a bit. So we have heard the first incomplete ending with harmonic digression and stasis, and when the verse is repeating, the cadence is avoided by a sudden interruption in D minor. And when after a repeated request, the choir begins to request God's mercy in syncopated rhythm martially with broken variant of Phrygian pianto E flat D, which transforms into an exclamation, only one of many strong weapons of classical rhetorics contained in this piece. Let's hear it. Speaking very resolutely with their God. So this instrumentation also already announced the approaching moment of the last judgment. This last judgment is a topic for itself we shall not be dealing with today due to the lack of time. But you know, this folk starts panicking about their salvation, and they receive no answer, and the movement will remain open until the last moment where this question will be finally answered. Let's hear the end of the first movement after this march of prayer. Yes. Oh, the soloists have no answer. This is the painting about from the same time as the Missale I showed you on the fresco I showed you in the beginning of the presentation. I just want you to hear a little bit of the Judgment Day, here just to have an expression of different style, where he treats choir differently and uses completely different means of expression from his early experimental phase. Chants and then other avant-garde. One knows what's happening. since we're running out of time, I wanted you all to hear the final absolution. We did not hear in the first movement, comes in the last movement in a also very schematic manner, Baroque manner, I would say. So let's listen to it. There is totally minor mode without division. Friends. So, we have heard that the topical content of Pugliese funeral mass draws from the canonical masterpieces of European art music, witnessing the composer's attempts of proving belonging to the wider European cultural context. The global narrative of the piece, as described by the composer himself, emerges from his intimate soliloquy on prayer, the last judgment, and the absolution. The affects of fear, despair, and hope of the praying believer, the expressionistic imagery of the martial terror of the Judgment Day, as well as the transcendental relief of the yearly absolution, come reinforced by means of textual manipulation, rhetorical tools, and meaningful instrumentation, again built upon the models from the composer's own imaginary museum of musical words in Villacre's words. So finally, based upon a short overview of meanings contained in Pugliese creation, Megalithic Requiem, we may conclude that this work is a genuine document of its times, a prominent example of musical postmodernism, which can be delineated in Jonathan Kramer's terms as a work that locates meaning and even structure in listeners more than in scores, performances, or composers. And just a final thought about the reception of the work. The composers, thanks to Pugliese's technical mastery, even the most demanding bars of this score and all his scores are well performable, and the musicians generally like to perform his works. Almost all soloists that performed here's Requiem ever listed that in their biographies. The creation of Megalithical Requiem was performed more than 20 times and recorded already twice, which is pretty rare in contemporary creation music, where most pieces, especially of such dimensions, receive more than a premiere and one recording at best. The live recording we heard today, performed by the choir and the orchestra of Bavarian Radio under the chief conductor Ivan Repusic, received the most prestigious discographic awards. The Megalithical Requiem serves as a showpiece on various diplomatic occasions whenever the Ministry of Foreign Affairs needs a representative piece. It is mentioned even in foreign reference books such as Metzler's Musikchronik. And taking all of that into account, one has to wonder why the Croatian musicological scene remains silent about this piece, as if the work bears no particular meaning. In a decade and a half, there was not a single critical review published, apart from a couple of neutral reports in daily newspapers. And of course, there were no analyses taken whatsoever. So this is the first step in this direction, and hopefully not the last one. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. That was really, really interesting and a wonderful piece of music. So thank you for introducing that to it.
Thank you. It's available on Spotify. It's this very good recording last one, because the first one was not this good, but this one is really
Speaking as a musician from Scotland, in relation to your last remark, one might remember Milan Kundera's comment about the fate of small countries.
Yeah. Yes.
And he doesn't mention the fate of small project countries.
Yeah.
Catalonia. Yes, thanks a lot for sharing this beautiful music that I don't get tired listening to. Yeah. Also, how beautiful that the Polish people here are obviously don't make a translation.
We know where we should be.
Yeah. We have our own lingua franca, a lot Slavic.
Amazing to experience that live. Really beautiful. So, any other questions? Oh,
Sorry, I haven't been for the. Maybe my question will be something that we already told. The question concerns the situation when this. Oh, now I see. 96.
1996.
This is one point. The second, the question is, maybe you already told it. So, is it connected somehow with the history, politics?
Yes, it was
It looks
composed right away, right after the war finished. The war finished in 1995, the War of Independence, and actually, I think that he even began with the composition before the war ended, and then in 1996, it was finished and premiered.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I know. But the question is how it was with religious subject in Croatian and Yugoslavia time before. The music, there was religious themes in the country or art of world. Was it something was really important and a lot of subject and a lot of cases of some cases, or it is not so representative?
I'd say that there were not many representative pieces of religious music in the second part of the 20th century, but I don't think it was due to the political any sort of political pressure, because the church had some life of its own. It's the matter is that actually the people of the church and the church musicians were very conservative and very and actually had only gave only modest compositional output in terms of very modest Sicilian-like music. And actually, before this Fuderis Requiem, we never had such a religious, liturgical work of such dimensions and such quality. Our previous composers, even old ones, even that 19th century so composed such pieces, but this cannot be compared to this mastery or experience here.
After this, when something happened, you that people, the composers started to be interested in this.
Well, there were two more requiems, which I don't personally like. And Fuderis also wrote two big religious pieces afterwards, which I do like very much, like this one.
Yes, thank you very much for such attractive and competent intellectual piece. And my question will be connected with the consciousness of composer, because we can, I think, listen, for example, the voice of Krzysztof Penderecki from his Stumble Passion, and also Carmina Burana by Karl Orff. It is Dies Irae theatrical vision. So the composer was conscious about this.
I'm afraid he was very conscious. I mean, I was well acquainted with him, and his daughter, who is a percussion professor, works with me, and I was also a producer of this radio choir for a couple of years. So we were very collaborating very intensively. He was a man of very broad education who was very well aware of what he using and a lot of students and many others role models.
Dedicated only to voices.
Yeah,
And the rest of the ghosts.
Yeah, you know what? When Eero commented on Mahler, that actually Mahler's symphonies contain the whole history of music. So I think that this was somehow the model Coneix also wanted to achieve, to contain everything he thought it was worth taking from the history of music, everything he appreciated in his works, especially this postmodern things.
Thank you very much.
I think thank you everybody for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now, Carolina, don't back. She is master in music theory and a PhD candidate. And she will be speaking about spatialization in music of the 60s, and especially three Polish composers, the names Dobrowolski, Serowski, and Koszewski. So we can't wait, Carolina.
Just a second. So thank you very much for having me. Yes, I will speak about three Polish composers, not very well known, even though I'm Polish musicologist, so hopefully I will tell you something new and interesting. This is just a short account of my presentation. I will first about introduction and about three composers, three compositions, and some final thoughts at the end. Interest in space represented in music is not a new phenomenon. On the metaphorical level, it dates back to antiquity and concept of the music of spheres. While in the more literal level, in the context of the spatial arrangement of the sound sources, it appears in the polychoral works of the Venetian schoolmasters and in individual examples from the whole work of the later composers. The second half of the 20th century brought a rise in spatial music, with a previously unknown frequency spatial works begin to appear, works in which composers experimented with various positions of loudspeakers or performance, not only on stage, but also beyond it. In my paper, I will talk about the phenomenon of music that is simultaneously spatial and acoustic, not electroacoustic, and that is without any performative elements, and music that involves live performers positioned in the non-traditional way around the audience or beyond the scene. My aim is to show different meanings or functions of musical spatialization and how the concept manifested itself in Polish music, using the examples of three compositions by different composers, written only a few years apart, in the 1960s. The 1960s were an extremely important moment in Polish music. At the time, Polish composers were availing themselves vigorously of the freedom that they were gaining as the political pressure on culture decreased, absorbing the new advances of Western avant-garde and arriving at their own innovative musical achievements. It was the time of the Warsaw Open, International Festival of Contemporary Music, and the period when the so-called Polish School of Composers was formed. The term appeared in the program booklet of the first edition of the festival in the
56 in the text signed by the organizers, the Polish Composers Union. Although no names were mentioned, the main the main organizers of the event was Kazimierz Tarasti, as well as in future editions Andrzej Dobrowolski. No definition or characteristics of the Polish School of Composition were given in the above mentioned texts, but it was already known at the time that it was a group of young independent composers who debuted during the political war. An avant-garde attitude, uncompromising and innovative in the fields of sound articulation, texture, etc., are the features of the most recognizable achievement in Polish music of the second half of the 20th century, sonorism. Dobrowolski, Serowski, and Tarasti are considered to be the representatives of the Polish School of Composers. These three composers differ from each other in many respects. They represent different centers: Krakow, Warsaw, Poznań, have different creative attitudes, styles, and aesthetic preferences. However, they come from the same generation, born in 1921 and 1922, and in the 1960s, each of them was entering their mature creativity phase, to use the Czesław Tomaszewski's term. This manifested itself in a rejection of traditional solutions and folkloric inspirations, and in reaching for more individual, advanced compositional means, and the transformation of the sound language. In the case of Dobrowolski, it was his fascination with electronic and concrete music. In the case of Serowski, a focus on timbre and sound qualities and instrumental music. And in the case of Boszewski, an exploration of possibilities in the field of vocal music. Critics and musicologists have commented a great deal on their different characters. Dobrowolski, whose compositions shunned emotions and were based more on logical relationships, abstract sounds, and rationality, was called a master of constructivism and a champion of building structures, while his work was music of pure form. Serowski came to be known as a creator of a sound poetics, whose attitude expressed a desire for the renewal of music essence by unleashing the sound, its new colors, figures, and movements. Boszewski, in turn, is, according to musicologists, a master of choral music, in whose music the aspiration to give choral music the rank of vocal orchestra was realized. What is important in the context of my paper, however, is that all three of them appears at the similar time and interest in the specialization of music. Music for strings and for groups of wind instruments, continue.
Yeah, it's
Should we continue?
Yes, please. Continue by all means. Have a drink.
Break for me.
I think.
Lost connection.
You should go on.
These three compositions used for strings, continue, and Polodicatum are the first examples in Polish music of the acoustic compositions in which the spatial arrangement of sound sources around the open was consciously designed by the authors. Let us take a closer look at them. The very title of Dobrowolski's composition indicates the makeup of the ensemble and suggests a division into 5 spatially arranged groups. In the musical sources, there are a graphic representation of the positioning of the entire ensemble on the stage. However, there is a second variant According to the author's program note and the account from the first stage performance, only the string orchestra should remain on the stage, and 4 groups of wind instruments should be placed around the audience in the 4 corners of the concert hall. This creates a square whose 2 diagonals and front to back positions define the framework for the special sound distribution. The work is in 1 movement. And in terms of sound, the whole has a homogeneous character. The pitch is ordered by the diphonic technique, or also the graphic aleatory notations in relation to rhythmic volumes. The strict orchestra provides an harmonic or pulsating background for the special events that take place between the groups of wind instruments. In Dobrowolski's original pre-composition sketches, it can be seen that he approached the issue of spatialization in the constructivist manner, considering various possible arrangements and trajectories of sound movement. The music confirms that the arrangement of the wind instruments is logical and symmetrical, as you can see on the diagram. The composer utilizes these trajectories to create simple spatial dialogues between specific instruments. Here I have an example. Not this one. Sorry for that. So here special dialogues and more complex example. Between the whole groups of instruments. There are also some interesting examples which show that Dobrowolski treated the 4 groups of wood instruments as there were 4 loudspeakers. Spatial movement combined with smooth changes of dynamics is reminiscent of stereophonic techniques applied when working with electronic sound. This is this work. Individual instruments and again with whole groups, the same effect. Sorry. Using crescendo and decrescendo with spatial movement in both ways. So that's beautiful. So the piece contains a part in a peculiar catalog of spatial effects. The transitions are usually expressive thanks to the specific timbre of the wind instruments, while their positioning reveals some important formal details. Sorowski's Continuum was written for percussion sextet. The composer used 123 percussion instruments, including non-traditional ones like brass bottles, which are divided into 6 groups and evenly distributed around the audience. Each performer has a slightly different set of instruments, by sets 1, 3, 4, and 2, 5, 6, clearly corresponds to each other. This division creates two configurations of two triangles, and as a result, the audience is surrounded by music consisting of very similar or completely different timbres. The piece has segmented structure. It consists of 63 short sections. The number of spatially distributed sound sources is larger than in Dobrowolski's work, which allowed Tarasti to create more sophisticated and complex textures in terms of spatialization. Every time the sound comes from a different place in the concert hall with different movement and direction. Here we have example of, I would say, the spatial polyphony event, because we have a lot of layers, a lot of voices that surround us from different places. In this piece, tension is increased due to the sharp contrast, also in terms of structure, timbre dynamics, and also spatialization. In this example, the music fills the whole space and suddenly is reduced to one single point. At first, sparkling pleasant sound, little by little, starts to occupy the concert hall from the front and from both right and left sides, except for the back. It lasts for several seconds, and only then, after the climax, the sole, resounding tone cluster with a subtle glow of the stage, played on tubular bells, appears at the back and opens the next segment. Many of the segments are constructed in a similar way, by gradually adding parts and preparing the sound texture and space. In this piece, in spite of limiting himself to percussion instruments only, Tarasti, with the aid of spatialization, managed to achieve a great balance of sound and expression. Here, I think we don't have time for this, but it's the final part of the piece. And Kraszewski's work contains words. Nicola Copernico Dedicatum is a cantata composed to celebrate the millennium of Polish statehood. The text is a poetic paraphrase of the main ideas from Nicolaus Copernicus de Revolutionibus Obrium Celestium by Józef Ratajczak in Latin. The symbolism of numbers plays an important role in the work. It has a three-part form. The first part is a glorification of the celestial spheres. The second illustrates Copernicus' basic thesis, and the third describes the sun as the center of the universe. The work is also divided into three groups. This corresponds to the three elements of the Copernican sky: the sun, the sphere, and the stars, and the 6 planets known to Copernicus. The arrangement of the movement of sounds filling the sound space symbolizes the arrangement of the movement of planets orbiting the sun. The contrast of heaven and earth also appears: infinitive, finitude, mass, point, day, night. Innovative and conventional performance means can be observed in the musical material, such as ensembles, shouting, speaking, whispering. A group of 6 solists is to be placed equally spaced around the audience. The space thus serves to emphasize the literal and symbolic meanings contained in the text and in the message of the piece. We will not find sound traveling along complicated trajectories here. The most important figure is the movement around a circle here. As well as gradual saturation of space by adding successive voices up to a full ensemble. Here, the symbolic meaning of the sound movement seems to be more important than the text itself. The words are broken down into syllables or phonemes, thus blurring its semantic sense and creating color illustrative effects. The opposition of male and female voices, which are placed in opposite hemispheres, is also clearly noticeable. Throughout the course of the piece, each of the ensemble, 2 chorus and solists, is assigned a different function. They interact or compete with each other. In the last culminating part, the composer uses various arrangements. For example, at the beginning, it quietens the group of solists, shifting the focus on the stage, and the later on the other way around, of bringing out the meaning of the text. It was given an example as well. Here and final parts. In each composition, spatialization was used in a different way. Also, different were the reasons and significance for its presence. In 1958, Tarasti, together with Dobrowolski, had the opportunity to be at the premiere performance of Harmonic Harmonization special piece group band in Darmstadt. This experience made an impression on both of them and influenced their interest in the aspect of space in their own compositions. In Tarast's case, this influence was strong and direct. Shortly afterward, inspired by Stockhausen, this is the spatial arrangement in Stockhausen's work, so free orchestra. So shortly afterwards, Tarasti, inspired by Stockhausen, composed episodes with his own concept of dividing the ensemble into 3 groups. However, without going beyond the stage. Continuum was a continuation of this inspiration and simultaneously the first piece in which he ordered the musicians to surround the audience. In Dobrowolski's case, the experience gained during his work at the experimental studio of the Polish radio, where he was active from 1960, proved to be as important, or maybe even more, than his stay at Darmstadt. Specialization in his instrumental work is a result of his fascination of the new technologies and stereophonic in electronic music, as well as an attempt to transfer this and interest to orchestral compositions. In Korzewski's case, though, it has another source. On the one hand, he refers to the traditional double chord technique, division into smaller and larger chord. On the other hand, specialization is linked on a symbolic level with the composition's dedication. The composer chose Copernicus' work because he wished us to recall Poland's contribution to science and work after, by an additional motivation to reach for the spatial position of the musician was, as he recalls, that then rapidly advancing exploration of space. These three attitudes and the three sources of inspiration or impact, the development of radio technology, the development of space technology, as well as the strong creative ferment in the musical environment, show very clearly all the most important reasons why the blossoming of acoustic spatial music in Polish music, but not only, took place precisely at that time. Finally, using the example of these compositions, we can observe three different meanings and functions in which spatialization can be used. In Dobrowolski's composition, it was treated constructively and had a structural function. In the case of Sorotsky, it was used as a means of color and for expressive potential and also carried dramatic significance. Whereas in Poszewski's work, spatialization were closely related to the symbolic meaning of the word. Speaking of significance, it is worth mentioning in conclusion what relevance the discussed spatial compositions had in the context of the further development of Polish music. It turns out that the idea found many enthusiast followers in the following decades. Thus, Sorotsky, Dobrowolski, and Poszewski's compositions set a new and important trend for the contemporary and future generations. Finally, I would like to note that acoustic spatial music is a phenomenon whose development is often hindered by problems of a non-artistic but purely practical nature. Concert halls are not designed for a non-traditional setting. That's obvious. Therefore, depending on the performance venue, communication difficulties may arise between musicians and conductor. Also, spatial music often requires more rehearsal and more money. Sometimes a particular spatial arrangement is simply not feasible due to health and safety considerations or institutional hostility. It often seems more convenient and simpler to just resort to electronics. Nevertheless, despite all the difficulties and the alternatives that are now readily available, spatial music for live performers has been and continues to be created today. It is music which, on the one hand, emerges from the spirit of its time, and on the other, allows one to believe that artistic potential can overcome mundane inconveniences. Thank you very much.